The big risk is that you could have an AI that's thinking for itself to find a vulnerability and then share it with another agentic AI that's doing something else. So it could find a vulnerability on the network, and then the other agentic might be working inside some kind of an application, and the two could actually collaborate to come up with a new
Wow.
way to potentially open up a threat or a vulnerability and create risk inside your network.
Welcome back to Between Fires and Futures. I'm your host, Tonya Terrell, and welcome back to cybersecurity expert Scott Alldridge. When we talked last week, Scott walked us through the zero trust illusion and why cybersecurity discipline breaks down long before a breach ever happens. Today, we're building on that conversation and stepping into something moving even faster, AI. Organizations are adopting AI at record speed. Innovation is accelerating. Business units are experimenting, but governance, oversight, and risk management are not always keeping pace. Scott returns not just as a cybersecurity executive, but as board advisor and transformational leader who works directly with organizations navigating digital transformation, regulatory pressure, and AI adoption in real time. As CEO of IP Services and president of the IT Process Institute, he brings a people, process, and technology lens to some of today's most urgent technology conversations. If episode 1 was about discipline, today is about velocity. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you back. I really wanted to continue the conversation into, this AI era. So you've cited research showing that mid-sized organizations are already using more than 20 AI tools. What does that tell you? Like, what should we be thinking about this?
Yeah, I think the business pressure and the executive pressure to take advantage of the efficiencies of AI is obviously mounting. Competitors are using it, so people feel like they've got to kind of be the firstest with the mostest, and they're missing out if they don't employ some of the AI capabilities to drive those efficiencies, which ultimately drives to the bottom line and can be a competitive differentiator. And as a business person, I get that. Certainly understand that desire.
Mm-hmm.
However, often as C-suite people do sometimes, or business initiatives take over, it's done without proper risk analysis and really evaluating what are the potential threats or vulnerabilities that could be created by employing some of these latest and greatest AI technologies. It's not all good. It's not automatically just because it's AI, is it going to take care of itself? And it's funny because it's a little bit back to when the first cloud came on, cloud computing so popular 10 to 15 years ago. There was kind of this fallacy that, we're moving all our stuff to the cloud, so magically everything's just going to be taken care of because it's in the cloud, right? No, systems still have to be managed. They still have to be secured. They still have to be monitored. They still have to be administered. And the same thing is true with AI. If you're going to deploy AI and allow the AI, features, capabilities, and abilities to enhance your organization, they still have to be managed, and you have to apply good risk management. And so that's really the concern. It's expanding your attack surface way farther and deeper, more than you would realize.
Mm-hmm. So where should an organization start?
Yeah, so I think, just AI, isn't being deployed, it's spreading. So the first thing you kind of think about is these blind spots, where exactly do we know where AI is being used? Do we have an inventory? Have we taken the time to understand which AIs we're using, where we're using them, and how we're using them? So I think the first thing is really understanding that just because you're deploying AI doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be okay and taken care of. And all of the potential vulnerabilities and threats, as I just shared, have been opened up. So you really have to inventory where you're at, how are you using it? And then, of course, I think it really starts with, a pre-approval process, right? So you really need to think deeper and have more, comprehensive thoughts. And I'm saying this because we see organizations are just deploying it without any guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to think about what guardrails do we want to put on this, and not from the more, generative AI that we're kind of the last couple of years everybody's kind of prolific with, right, where it kind of estimates and guesses what it is it thinks that you want it to say. Therefore, we have hallucinations. We have a lot of things that come out of that AI that may not be, super accurate, and we have to be, we have to be careful about that. and think about the risk of that, right? We're doing a board report, but we recast the financials in AI, but it actually hallucinated and put the wrong numbers in there. Now you're giving
Mm-hmm.
misinformation to your board as an example. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're moving into the agentic world, right? Where this autonomous idea where agents can do things, they actually can do work, they're empowered to actually click on things. And matter of fact, I was thinking about a social site that was an experiment that I read about recently where somebody set up a social, ability for kind of a website, almost like a Facebook, but you had to be an agentic AI to join.
Oh,
They
I
had
saw
several of
this.
them join. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
in a little while, they started making some jokes about things and they started talking and kind of fantasizing about things they could do. And then before you know it, they were actually making fun of humans. So
Yeah, I saw
again,
that. That's
very
crazy.
controlled, yeah, very controlled environment. So they really couldn't do any damage, but it gives you a little bit of an insight as to where this agentic world can go. And so the big risk is that you could have an AI that's thinking for itself to find a vulnerability and then share it with another agentic AI that's doing something else. So it could find a vulnerability on the network, and then the other agentic might be working inside some kind of an application, and the two could actually collaborate to come up with a new
Wow.
way to potentially open up a threat or a vulnerability and create risk inside your network. So there's a lot to think about when we think about moving from this generative idea to this agentic idea. And then ultimately, right, self-evolving, self-learning, the ultimate of AI, which we're ways out on that, but you can see obviously the
It's
ground is
coming.
being laid.
Yeah, it's coming. It's just a matter of time. Um, so, can you sort of walk us through the steps? What there is a lot to think about here. What you just shared about that little experiment, I remember seeing that all over social media. It was actually really scary and shocking
Yeah,
and fascinating all at the same time. So, there is a lot to think about. What are the sort of the different steps or phases that a security leader should be thinking about right now with AI adoption?
sure. So I think the big word is governance, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes that sounds draconian, and it's like we're going to have a bunch of policy and procedure stuff that often sometimes gets put away, filed away either electronically or literally in a some kind of a three-ring binder somewhere that nobody's paying attention to. But the truth is, you need to have real, active, present governance going on. So again, we start with understanding, where's AI being used in my organization? Are we using it today? How are we using it? Where's it being used? That's the first thing, right? We sometimes kind of talk about, stabilizing the patient in some of the visible ops books. We talk about this idea of, first responders kind of thing. So we got to kind of take that approach, because you could be opening up threats that you don't even realize, and it could be creating quite grave danger, quite frankly, to your network organizations, to threat actors to take advantage of. So let's get inventory and control of what's going on. And then let's think about governance, right? So let's think about the policy and procedures that we do want to have, right? That we're going to make sure we're going to operate by. So there's some kind of a formalized process as to what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. There's a lot there to unpack, right? But you got to have, clarity around what, storage and how it's going to be used, and can AI access your data, and what data can it access, and where is it flowing? So we start with modeling that, understanding which AI we have, having governance programs in place, so inventory, governance, and then we start to model where and how we're going to allow AI to be used in our organization. Are we even going to let it use our accounting program at this point in time? And the other thing is that as I look back at what kind of inspired some of the book, the Visible Ops AI book, is that this 20 some variations of AI are being used in organizations on a survey from about 500 companies with up to 1,000 employees. The thing about that is that most of those are freemiums. So it's somebody in the department, maybe they don't have budget, they don't want to spend the $50 a month or whatever it is. So they're actually using a free version of it, and there's actually no guarantees in the service level agreements or the license agreements that they're going to keep your data confidential. So in that
Mm.
problem domain, we're also seeing now that there's lawsuits going on where the the agentic AI, or I'm sorry, the generative AI is now sharing confidential information that it doesn't know, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to keep it private. And so it's now being shared on other queries because it's alerting on the data from everybody that you're allowing it to do. It's not it's not saying privatized, it has no guardrails, etc. So again, huge risks that could be opened up.
Oh, yeah.
But the governance, the policy, then modeling exactly where you're going to allow AI to go into your organization. And then I think lastly is really understanding kind of the deeper layer of the AI. You've got to get in and model kind of to some degree at a software level, if you will, exactly where and how the data is going to flow within the AI and what it's going to be allowed to do. We're seeing things like, beyond the typical hallucinations, we get into some of the agentic stuff, you're going to see bias. You're going to see, prejudice that's going to be applied. One example is, a mortgage company that caught themselves, quite frankly, in the story I read, where it was denying a bunch of home mortgages loans from a particular, geographic area in a large city because it had great big default rates and there was high default. So the logic train said, we're not going to approve any loans out of that zip code. Well, that obviously, for lots of reasons, is problematic and against the law, quite frankly. So you can see, how AI, even within the engine itself, can be flawed. So how do we have controls within the engine itself? And there are some up and coming platforms and capabilities and ways to do that. On a more practical level, you should be using an AI that you really can apply guardrails and governance with. And quite frankly, as much as I hate to say it, because we know that Microsoft can be pretty messy sometimes, they're pretty ahead of the game with the Microsoft Copilot. That's probably one of the better ones. There are some other fast up and coming tools that are allowing you to put guardrails on AI and governance around how and where it can be deployed and used within a network or an organization. But the Copilot right now probably has the quickest, easiest, bestest one to configure at this point in time. So then that's what we're doing. So again, if you're developing and deploying AI, that's kind of next level. Some of the stuff I was referring to earlier. If you're just letting people use it for the matter of day in a life efficiency, more generative stuff, you still want to have some guardrails in there.
Yeah, makes sense. What's the biggest governance blind spot you're seeing right now with AI adoption?
Who owns the AI risk? Who's going to own it? Does the business own it? Does IT own it? Does your compliance department own it? Right? These are things that are concerned, right? So yeah, that's a real big piece. Then what are they going to allow, right? There may be within the organization, it could get political at some degree to what may be allowed to be used, but other things may not. So there's kind of that thing. Who owns the risk? Where's the data being shared and who is accessing the data? How's that interfacing? Because that's the most important thing. And then how are the outputs being validated? Some of the stuff I referred to, I guess the soundbite would be AI governance, starts with asking better questions, not buying more tools. So we got to first start there, right? And then, of course, as we get into agentic, that is where we are taking actions now. And you could see a lot of different things going on and what it can open up in that world, right? Triggering workflows and making decisions and talking to themselves, as I referred to earlier. So we're moving from, AI that informs, like the generative stuff, to AI that's actually taking actions. It acts. That's the scary part.
Yeah. So if I'm a CIO listening today, what questions should I be asking about AI usage inside the organization?
Yeah, and not to sound redundant, but it is some of the obvious one, right? Now, do we have an inventory of all of our AI? Do we know where it's being used in the organization, right? That's the first thing. And who's using it right now? What data is being shared or used or accessed by that AI, right? Kind of a practical thing to map out. And who's owning the risk, right? Am I owning it? Is my department, is this going to roll up to the CISO? Is that what, or is it the business approved this? You probably want to, cover your proverbial butt, so to speak, right? And make sure that the business is saying, we are okay using it under this policy and this understanding. So making sure you get the business, approval, buy-in, and understanding, and it's very clear who's owning the decision process, the approval process, et cetera. And then lastly, again, is how are outputs being validated? So whatever it's outputting, whether that's going to doing actions like agentic's going to be doing, or whether it's generative stuff, who's validating that? How do we know that that output is actually accurate and appropriate and can be shared, et cetera, et cetera? Don't open ourselves up to lawsuits, open ourselves up to, leaked data, cyber breaches, threat actors that will find new, vulnerabilities, all because we just deployed some AI thing that we think is really cool and does it really fast and it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely organizational tension here, right? Like we're seeing studies showing employees are using AI tools without formal approval or oversight. So does IT even have visibility into what's happening inside their own organization? Like, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the issue, right? Is that it's not being addressed, or we're behind catching up from, the governance side of the equation, the understand. And then there's compliance, right? I mean, compliance plays into there as well. So you may not be governing, therefore you're violating compliance and you don't even know it. And we see a lot of this, going on. So I think that the important thing is that because it's happening, you really have to get command and control, right? We've got to stop the crazy of everybody
Right.
just using an AI, and there are ways you can put controls into your networks, applications, and systems. But it generally starts with leadership. It starts with a
Mhm.
leadership having an understanding as who's going to own this, who's going to enforce the policy, write the policy, and make sure that the governance is carried out. And in a lot of cases, we have those teams, committees. The line of responsibility is very clear as we think about other types of parts of technology that we use in a business. And this really is no different. AI just needs to be considered as its own classification and its own risk. And there needs to be risk analysis that's applied to it to understand what those risks are for any particular business. If you're in manufacturing, it could be something very different than if you're in healthcare. But nonetheless, AI does present and will open up additional risks. So you've
Mhm.
got to address those. And so there's no real way to control it completely unless you're really using, good policy procedure and tooling, if you will, on your network
Mhm.
as well. You got to be able to control who's able to download what, run what applications where, right? If you don't have those controls in place, you're really, really vulnerable for the AI stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if they, even before they're moving into generative AI, even with LLMs, if employees are pasting proprietary data into AI tools without guardrails, that changes the exposure equation.
It's huge, and so I think what one of the bottom lines and one of the things that we preach pretty hard is human oversight is not negotiable, right? You
Hmm.
you still have to have human intervention, just like in the cyber world of a lot of the SOC and stuff that's going Security Operations Center and the detective, threat monitoring and stuff that's out there. A lot of companies out there preaching, well, AI can do it so much better, faster, quicker. They rely on AI. And the truth is, AI certainly plays a role. And if an organization that's delivering cyber services is not using AI, then they're behind, and that's problematic. At the same time, if they're 100% reliant upon AI, I would run, because when
Hmm.
it happens, you have to have human led intelligence that's really able to look at the bigger, broader landscape and things that AI really can't do. Eventually, it'll be trained to do some of those things, but it's not there. And quite frankly, we're years away from it
Yeah.
probably being at that level. So be careful with all the noise out there around we're fully AI deployed and fully AI operated, especially if you're dealing with cybersecurity or something like that, or
Hmm.
applications or whatever. That's really, it can accelerate decisions, but humans have to own them.
Right. Right. So, what happens when autonomous AI systems begin interacting with each other inside an enterprise environment?
So this comes back to controls, right? Do you have the right
Hmm.
detective controls on your network? This is where we get into, in my other book, we talk a little bit about integrity management and we talk
Hmm.
about change management. And the real truth is that some of those foundational IT processes are really your ultimate backstop. They're
Hmm.
not that sexy, they're not that amazing in terms of what we're dealing with. And you can't do good change management if you don't have good configuration management. In other words, you got to know what you have. So if you have a secure, tightened down, hardened operating system and a configuration, whether it's a firewall, whatever IT asset, right, a server, a firewall, a workstation, and you know what an integrous position of that asset is, that it's integrous and it's secured, it's working, and it's
Hmm.
properly configured, then we move from one well-known good state to another well-known good state. And the way we do that is we do it by vetting it through proper change management. So we got to have detective controls to know the things that might be trying to be changed, that should be changed, will actually not be allowed. So it'll actually prevent change, it'll roll back change. This is how we start to manage the integrity of a system and think of things more as systems architecture, not just point and pieces of point based technology that
Hmm.
can be rogue, but we know that it fits into a system. So I think that's where, a lot of your foundational controls, and then it sounds easy to say, it's a little harder to do, but change management requires good configuration management. Configuration management requires good release management. And those three become a closed loop process. That was
Hmm.
from our original Visible Ops book. As we
Hmm.
move to integrity management, that's where we're starting to look at things like from the lens of the whole system is integrous and we keep it from one integrous state to the next integrous state as a whole system. So we're, of course, looking at file integrity monitor, right? FIM, as we talk about monitoring. We're looking at the ability to have real-time compliance monitoring going on. So
Hmm.
at any point in time, real time, ongoing, that you're compliant or not compliant. That's where things are moving towards. So if something does find a way to, you know, improperly position itself or configure itself, or if somebody improperly rolls something out, is able to prevent or circumvent your controls, you actually have detection, and you can prevent that from doing something bad to your network and opening up. So that's kind of where we're getting into. A lot of the business processes, there's tooling to go with that too, but a lot of it comes back to those IT processes. They're still very, very foundational. I mean, just like change management, I'll just a second on this. I mean, just thinking about change is like, oh yeah, well, everybody know about the change and what are we changing? Well, those are the obvious things, but it really gets down in what we call the IT infrastructure library, or ITIL. We look at change like, do we classify the change? Is this a pre-approved, text on a website? Great. But is it a significant change? Then we're going to get the CAD, the change advisory holders, involved. Are we putting all of the assets in a CMDB, which is a configuration management database, so that we can track those assets, the changes, the updates, all the things, the maintenance contracts? This is kind of how you start to, and I'm just giving an example, drilling down on change management. The same's for config and release management as well, and then integrity management. But this is where we start to break things down into just kind of common sense, but often overlooked. Roll the eyes for IT people, because it seems like a lot of unnecessary stuff to do, when in fact it actually could be the very thing that saves your network from being breached, quite frankly. Two quips. One is 70 to 80% of all IT failure, and the least ones I read was like 70. It was the Verizon report 2024 was still at 70% of all IT failure. Lack of availability, downtime was correlated to some unapproved, unauthorized, untested change. Fast forward to the Visible Ops Cybersecurity book, where I put the quip in, no security breach happens without a change or a need for a change. In other words, and I might have mentioned this in my last podcast, but either you're going to brute force into something, right? You're going to scan against it, find an open port, do the nefarious things you do, or man in the middle attack. Some way you're going to go in, you're going to make a change, and through that change, you're going to be able to garner access. Or I'm going to fish FIs somebody through social engineering and convince them to make a change a password, click on an email, whatever it might be doing. So a lot of these, crazy fool with the tool is still a fool stuff that I talk about, and all the shiny toy of the vendors are the latest, greatest thing that you're going to do that's going to protect you with AI. A lot of that honestly comes back to blocking and tackling foundational IT processes. That is your best cybersecurity backstop.
Yeah, this is good. This is really good. There is, we're hearing actually a lot of excitement around AI-driven security platforms too. But like you mentioned, we still have to emphasize the need for human oversight. So can you talk a little bit about, this, like what we're seeing is vendors are claiming AI can fully secure an organization. So talk a little bit about why 100% AI-driven cybersecurity is so dangerous.
Yeah, I think that, this is back to what I was talking about. Human oversight is really important. Sometimes we joke a little bit like the Matrix movie that a lot of us geeks like, is there's the lady in the red dress that you're even, trying to see. And I think that's where AI really is not at a level of where it can detect that layer of interlacing that's going on. So you really have to be able to take, data from this information, data from this point, data from the various points that you're looking at the network, and be able to make cognitive human decisions about how best to either arrest or stop a potential attack or threat or leakage. So there still has to be this, again, I keep talking about the fool with the tool is still a fool with AI. So the 100% thing, I'm sorry to be a naysayer or skeptic, but I am a skeptic about that. There are some things that they're being worked on. Again, I just don't think they're fully tested and proven, where even around change, right? Using AI to be able to monitor change on an information really ties into those foundational controls. And could we use, more automation and AI in those areas to help manage that more effectively? Sure. And that's being worked on and done, but nothing that I've seen has arrived yet. And certainly none of the networks that I'm going to be involved with or manage or advise upon, or the boards I speak with, am I going to, if I hear that somebody's going 100% AI on cybersecurity, I am going to consult them as fast and as hard as I can to run away from that technology. So I'm in disbelief, the bottom line, that you really can use AI as a 100% way to protect and secure a network and systems at this in your data at this point in time.
Yeah, it seems like what we were talking about last time. Like, it's just right now, that's marketing noise, if that's what we're hearing.
It is.
And we have to be careful about that. Yep. So where must human oversight remain central in cybersecurity strategy? At which layer?
Yeah. I think, this is back to a little bit we spoke before, right? We're hitting some themes here, but the theme is, right, critical decisions about where and how you're deploying your AI. How are you governing it, right? The management of IT, right? It's the economy stupid, it's the management stupid. That's really important, right? You have to have a governance platform in a way that you've agreed with the business as to what's allowable and not allowable. It starts there. And then output validation. Do you have controls in place so you just don't let automation take over and it actually does some nefarious bad things, whether that's, again, hallucinating or allowing data to be exposed that was not intended to be exposed, or even formatting, if you will, or whatever your financials and uploading that data into your AI and not knowing exactly where that data is flowing. You could be exposing the organization. And then, of course, that's output validation, right? And then risk and policy ownership, right? Who's owning the risk? Is the business, going to own it? Is IT going to own it? Is the security department and group going to own it? Your vCIS? So who's owning it? Or is it a group? Is it a collaborative? That's fine. But that should be very much defined. And then I think another thing that's overlooked a lot in the world of AI, because we think it's all automatic, is incident response, which is no different than a security breach. Do we have a plan that if we discover AI is now doing some nefarious things, do we actually have an incident response plan? And what does that look like? And does it make sense? And then we should tabletop that, right? And then actually do the exercise so we know it actually works. If we actually did experience the unthinkable weird AI leakage, or somebody deployed AI and snuck it into the network we didn't know about, how do we seal it back up, and how do we do forensics and all the analysis that needs to be done? So I could go on and on. There's lots to be done. And then, of course, all of this feeds into compliance.
Yeah. So, I know we've talked a little bit about this. We've touched on this, but I want to go a little bit deeper about how AI complicates compliant environments. I'm really curious, do regulators even fully understand AI yet? Or are organizations outpacing that regulatory clarity?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, and the truth about it is kind of yes and no to all of it. It's very hard to track data flows unless you really have really good command and control. If you develop the AI, you might be able to put guardrails in there, but developing AI brings on a whole nother layer of risk. Supply chain, and how are you actually developing within true practices that you can keep secure. You understand exactly where the AI is going, how you developed your LLMs, how privatizing them, how's it going to learn? There's lots there in the development life cycle that you got to think about if you're going to do it. But it's really hard to track the data flows on, data that or AI that you're employing that's already pre-built. They may give you a quick list of, 2 or 3 things on how our data flow works, but do you really know? And if the AI is doing some agentic stuff that's going on now, and it evolves and gets smarter and better and learns, well, then new data flows are going to be, they're going to be forged. And so you may not know where that data is garnering, where it's being released or accessed. So again, harder to track data flows, non-deterministic outputs, right? We don't really know exactly what the output is going to be of the AI, and is it correct and right, or is it not? And that's pretty important, because we need to manage by fact, not by belief or some misinformation. Right. So that's important. And then third-party risk, right? That's the other thing that's not hardly talked about, is that we think about compliance. We're using these vendors because they do these really awesome, cool things. How do we know that they have a governance program for AI? They really have guardrails in their AI. They may say it, but do you know it, right? And there's always a risk there around third parties, but that's a big one that people aren't thinking about, deploying some new cool vendor tool because the vendor is using AI to get something done, but they're not thinking about how that AI might be able to garner access into the network or share your data. Again, some of the same themes that we see in all the other ways. So that third-party risk is big. And so regulators, though, they're still going to expect accountability, right? All the control frameworks, as you read them, then talk about data security, that language really doesn't change when it comes to AI. It's still the same compliance language, and it would cover what AI is doing. AI either is generating stuff from that data that you're supposed to be secure. So the compliance rule is still the compliance call out. The control is still the control that you have to have in place and be able to attest, and adhere to, then prove, right? Document that you're actually following those controls. So there's the regulators definitely expect it, and you're not going to get some get out of jail free card if you have some major violation and get fined a bunch of money just because oh, it was a third party using AI and we didn't know it. That's not going to work. And they're
Right.
quickly, wising up to that and asking more questions because of the onset of AI. The regulators are asking more of those things.
Hmm.
They're realizing it. Just like insurance companies, they're getting really smart about cybersecurity and learning that if you don't have these types of controls and processes and active threat detection on your network and advanced MFA or really verified credential access, they're putting all this fine print because they're again 40% of all cybersecurity claims got denied in insurance last year because they're getting really smart and realizing if you're not going to be responsible for following good cybersecurity
Right.
posture in your network, we're not going to pay the claim. And we're going to
Yeah.
see AI move into that same thing. It's already happening, but you're going to see
Hmm.
more and more controls and requirements in our insurance that's going to say if you have data exposure and leakage or whatever, you need to be following certain processes and controls. And if you can't attest that you're doing that, they're not going to pay the claims.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes complete sense. And we're also seeing like an increase in regulatory attention globally from the EU AI Act to more broad AI accountability discussions here in the US. From what you're seeing, do you think organizations are underestimating how quickly governance expectations are evolving?
Yeah, I would think definitely. I think that
Yeah.
they're moving at the speed of thought and not really evaluating the risk.
Hmm.
And I think that compliance already at a foundational level covers a lot of the potential vulnerabilities or risks that they're trying to make sure that you attest that you have controls around because it's already covered. When you talk about data security, that doesn't excuse itself from your AI usage. If
Hmm.
your one of your controls is to make sure that you understand the flow of data from the very beginning to the very end of whatever that data flow is, and that's something you're supposed to have a control and attest to. If AI takes and runs with it, you're responsible for what that AI is doing with it. So I think that yeah. Then honestly, some of the regulatory requirements internationally are a little ahead of some of the things we've yet to catch up to with some of our compliance. DORA, for
Hmm.
example, does a really good job in the EU. It's very popular, and it really gets way more down into the nitty gritty of information usage, particularly confidential information, requirements around that, and data that's used, access to data. They have a lot more detail in their compliance frameworks than the popular ones that we tend to rely on here. But NIST is catching up. NIST has a new RMF. They have a new framework for AI. It's a really good one. I think it does a pretty good job. So I would encourage organizations that are using AI and trying to understand whether it's your AI that you developed or not. I think benchmarking against the NIST AI standard
Hmm.
and it just got finalized just recently, and I think it's a really good framework to look to. And the National Institute of Security Standards obviously is one of the de facto that the whole world looks to for the best in practice around
Hmm.
your security controls.
Yeah, that's great advice. Should U.S. security teams, IT teams, be looking at the EU regulations and assuming that we're just a little bit behind and it's coming our way?
That's already happening, honestly.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of new legislation that is being looked at, passed, and expanded, and even into industries. Like I recently joined the board of the Cybersecurity Association for the food industry. We've talked
Mhm.
about the dams and we've talked about the electrical grids and stuff for years, and they're catching up with some of those things. The SCADA and how do you control that operational technology and keep it secure? And of course, now with AI, there's even further concerns around that. But when we think about the supply chain, like even food, it's very interesting because the USDA, they certainly make sure it's not spoilage, and there are certain things around the health of the food that they're adding new requirements to. But one thing that's massively overlooked, just as an example of one sector, and that's why I'm very interested in, is the food industry. Like, yeah, that's really scary. There's a story about a ship for the overseas bases that it's a big supply ship that the military runs, and they pick up 1 million pounds of chicken from China and then
Mhm.
they distribute it to 14 military bases and then go back. Guess what kind of controls and cybersecurity controls are around the 1 million pounds of chicken that's being produced and processed and shipped?
I can't
None.
even imagine.
And so you can think
Really?
about the bio threat that could be there, right? You want to kill a
Oh,
bunch of
wow.
military people or whatever. I could get into very big examples. Your mind can run a little wild with that, but you can just see from that
Yeah.
one example what the exposure is potentially by not having good cybersecurity. So there is new legislation last year worked on. They expect maybe around July of this year. and it's going to go into kind of the NIST 800-171, the same thing that a lot of the contractors to the government have to follow. You know, the NIST 171 has 110 control objectives, 14 domains, and it really breaks down into what I think is a pretty good taxonomy about how you really protect your data and your systems from a cybersecurity perspective. And AI is no different. It's embodied in those controls, even though it's not specifically called out. So to answer the question long form as I am, is that you're going to start to see AI more specifically called out, even though it might be certainly covered by some control objective, A-2-3 might say data security control, but they're going to actually call it AI more specifically. You're going to see those updates happening, and they're already happening.
Mm-hmm. Scott, if a leadership team feels behind on AI governance, what is like the very first discipline step that they should take right now? Like the calm first move.
Yeah, so the first thing you should do is you should basically inventory wherever AI might be used in your organization and immediately cease and desist order to your teams. I know that sounds crazy, and some teams are off and running, and that would be a lot of pushback. And then you need to evaluate or prioritize which ones are most impactful to the business, right? So that's your own matrix or hot map that you're going to have to look at based on what you discover on the inventory. But inventory it and stop it. Then apply some intelligence to it. And again, you need to think about policy. You need to think about who's owning it. You need to think about procedure. So you have some of those things, a rubric, if you will, that you're going to refer to as to how you're going to evaluate IT, and you have a process for it. But then you're going to arrest and stop it, and you're going to evaluate each of those and prioritize it based on what's most important to the business, making sure that it hits a certain criteria. And there's lots of good frameworks. Again, the NIST framework out there for AI is a really good one, and making sure that you look through that lens, that you really are protected and you're not violating compliance. It could set you up for lawsuits or vulnerabilities or threats or whatever it might be, or fines. But then also be able to look at, are you, doing bad stuff, right? Because just because you're not meeting compliance is one thing. If you're leaking confidential, proprietary company information, that's a whole nother thing. It not just violates compliance, it sets you up for all kinds of stuff. So that's what the first thing I do. And then you just re-release it back into the wild, right? So you capture it, then, out of the wild, you bring it in, you get it at control, and then you release it piece by piece, AI by AI, into whichever the most prioritized pieces are for your business, and making sure that it fits. And some of them won't, quite frankly. Some of them will have to look for a different, AI tool that has more guardrails. You may have to deploy some third-party guardrails. It will be disruptive a little bit, but better to take some intentional disruption to protect your business than to have the unthinkable happen, where it opens up some hole and all your data is leaked out and you're out of business. Quite frankly, it happens. We're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years, based on what we're talking about, we're just a little ahead of our time drilling down in this stuff, because people aren't talking about it enough. They're not thinking about it enough. It's lagging a little bit, this idea of governance around AI. And so what we're going to see in the interim, right, is we're going to see massive breaches happen, massive leakage and lawsuits happen. It's coming. It's unfortunate. I hate to say it, but in the next 2 years, 2 years, 3 years, you're going to read some terrible stories.
Yeah, and that'll wake everybody up.
It will.
Scott, this was really, I think, such an important and powerful conversation. I really thank you for coming back to go deeper on the AI security, because, AI is not slowing down, right? It's accelerating inside every department, really. So the question isn't whether companies are using AI, it's whether it's being governed with the same discipline that we talked about in our last episode.
Yep.
So if today's discussion surfaced blind spots around AI security posture or governance, it's not a reason to panic. Now's the time to lead. So Scott, again, has generously offered a complimentary e-copy of his Amazon bestseller, Visible Ops Cybersecurity, for listeners who want to go deeper into the operational framework behind strong cybersecurity and AI governance. And from this discussion, it looks like, even though like last week we talked about cybersecurity and this week about AI, it translates. Everything that we need to do for cybersecurity and governance and compliance applies to what we're doing now with AI.
They are simpatico, and I'll jump in. I would also offer up, if somebody reaches out and they would refer to I have my Visible Ops AI. It's about governance for AI, the very thing that we've talked about this whole episode long. And so I'd be happy to share an e-copy of that if you reach out to me as well. I can give you some information. The other thing is that back to the Pen 1 test that we offered before and some of the analysis that we can do. That Pen 1 will actually look at your network and it will actually tell you what AI is being ran on your network. It'll give you some informational feedback. So I again would refer back to, I have a few of those I can offer. I can't do a bunch because they cost, but we're offering up a few to kind of help raise the tide that floats the boat. So if you reach out to me at that 541-359-1269, that's a business text line, and my team will get the e-copy of the book. Just say which one you want. You can put Secure 26 in there. You can say, I want to know more about the pen test or the AI assessment. Let us know, and we'd be happy to reach out. Again, 541-359-1269, and then let my team know. We can get you either the Visible AI book or the Visible e-copy of the Visible Cybersecurity. That's the Amazon bestseller. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Amazing. Yes, I will link all of that in the show notes. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge around this, and I know it's been a really valuable conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.